Welcome to the Book Bungalow's virtual Writers of the Future author illustrator event featuring David Farland, Storm Humbert, Leah Ning, and Daniel Bitton. This event, can you hear me?
Yes.
I don't know why. Okay. This event is part of the 22nd annual Utah Humanities Book Festival. This annual free festival is the Utah Humanities gift to the community, allowing us to explore all sorts of ideas by interacting with great writers. The complete program is available at www.utahhumanities.org. My name is Tanya Mills, and I'm the owner and manager of the Book Bungalow in St. George, Utah. Southern Utah's only independent bookstore offering all new books and a full range of events. While we're open and taking precautions, we're doing our events virtually for now, particularly because the COVID rate's beginning to go back up. Writers of the Future, Volume 36, is available for order from our store's website, as are other books related to today's presentation. I'll be posting those links in the chat room. One link if you're only interested in that volume, and the other link to a page that offers both that volume and some earlier editions, as well as some of David Farland's books. I'll also be posting links to all our guests' websites and a link to a quick survey for the book festival so that you can let them know what you thought of our event today. We'll be sure to include most of these links at the end of our recording before we post it to our YouTube channel this weekend. Those of you who registered will receive a follow-up email. I lost my place admitting people. A follow-up email with both the survey link and the YouTube link as soon as it goes live. As many of you may already know, Writers of the Future is a science fiction and fantasy story contest established by L. Ron Hubbard in the early 80s. A sister contest, Illustrators of the Future, presents awards for science fiction art. There's no entry fee, and it's the highest paying contest for amateur science fiction and fantasy writers. Besides Dave Wolverton himself, aka David Farland, notable winners in the past have included Stephen Baxter, Karen Joy Fowler, James Allen Gardner, Nina Kuricki Hoffman, Dean Wesley Smith, and others. The 12 winning stories each year are paired with 12 winning illustrators and published in an annual anthology. And we've got, of this year's book, Publishers Weekly wrote, here's some of the illustrations. In fact, here's Daniel's illustration. If I can get that out of the way. I don't know if that's, am I showing the rights? There, yes. Publishers Weekly wrote, this hefty, competent anthology showcases 12 consistently solid short stories, each accompanied by a full color illustration. A worthwhile survey of new voices in the field, rounded out with 4 stories from established authors and 3 essays on craft. Genre enthusiasts should take note. Today, besides David Farland, longtime editor of Writers of the Future, we have 2 of Volume 36's winning authors, Storm Humbert and Leah Ning. Wave to us, there we go. Along with one of its winning illustrators, Daniel Bitton. And additionally, we have at least one other winning author who was to have been appearing with David Farland about a month ago, David Elsenson. He's in the audience. I hope he'll jump in with some questions when the time comes for questions. And you can, as we're meeting, you can go ahead and put those questions in the chat room. Let me introduce our guests briefly. First, we have Dave Wolverton, known more widely in the worlds of science fiction and fantasy as Dave Farland. He is a New York Times bestselling author with more than 50 novels and anthologies to his credit. He's won numerous awards, including the L. Ron Hubbard Gold Award in 1987, and has served as coordinating judge of the Writers of the Future for more than a dozen years. He's helped mentor hundreds of new writers, including such #1 best-selling authors as Brandon Sanderson, Stephanie Meyer, Brandon Mull, James Dashner, and others. While writing Star Wars novels in 1998, he was asked to help choose a book to push big for Scholastic. And what do you know? He selected Harry Potter, then helped develop a bestseller strategy for it. And as if this wasn't enough to keep him busy, he has assisted with video game design and greenlighting analysis for movies in Hollywood, as well as teaching workshops and online classes. And he was just telling us about this before, and maybe he'll go into it a little when he's talking. As soon as I get through my initial questions, I will be turning the time over to him to handle the remainder of the discussion today. Now, next we have Storm Humbert, who wrote the third-place winning story, Stolen Sky. Storm grew up in Northwest Ohio, did his undergraduate studies at The Ohio State University, where he majored in English literature with minors in creative writing and theater. After 2 years of working odd jobs, he earned his MFA from Temple University in Philadelphia, studying under such excellent teachers as Samuel R. Delaney and Don Lee. He also taught a variety of writing classes there, as well as at Siena Heights University in Adrian, Michigan. Currently, he's a professional legal writer and a slush reader for Clark's World magazine, while he continues his own writing. In addition, Storm was a silver honorable mention in this same contest in 2016 and a finalist in 2018. Leah Ning won for her story Yellow and Pink. She's a software developer trying to break into writing, and she documents the experience on her blog for those who are also trying to follow the writing path. There, she provides thoughts and updates on the progression of what she hopes will become her writing career. She's also been published in the magazine Cosmas Infinities. If I mispronounced that, I'm sorry. And the anthology Apocalyptic. She resides in Virginia with her husband, 2 cats, a dog, and a pair of sugar gliders, which are kind of flying squirrel. I had to look them up because you said they were so cute, and they are. And I was almost going to put a picture up, but it would take too long for me to figure out Shane's screen sharing. Finally, our winning illustrator, Daniel Bitton, and I showed you his illustration already for the story Molting Season, is a freelance illustrator from Miami, Florida, who loves, did you get much of the hurricane there?
Yeah, oh, it
Just
kind
a
of
lot of
skirted
rain?
by. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
it just barely missed us, so.
Okay. He loves to depict fantastic characters and tell stories through his illustrations, which are inspired by dreams, myths, and history. Through a mix of layered digital and traditional media, Daniel's work primarily focuses on themes of dark fantasy with historical allegories. He received a BFA in illustration from the Maryland Institute College of Art in 2019 and attended the Illustration Academy in Kansas City in the summer of 2018. He's currently working on a series of fantasy illustrations to accompany published short stories. When not drawing, he can be found running outside on the trails or thinking about his next project. Having said all of this, and that was a lot to say, I encourage you who are watching and listening, oh, I've got somebody else to admit, hope they weren't waiting too long. I encourage you to post any questions or comments you may have during the discussion in the chat room. And now let me begin by posing a few questions to Storm. I want to know first, Storm, if your winning story, Stolen Sky, was entirely different from your entries in those past contests, or was it a revision of an earlier entry?
All my entries were entirely different. I never revised and re-entered a story, mostly because the ones that I had entered before sold places, so I couldn't revise them and re-enter
Oh, yeah.
them.
Well, good.
My first silver honorable mention was published in Andromeda Spaceways. My one that got rejected was published in Apex, and then my finalist story is sitting somewhere right now, and it will hopefully sell there.
Oh, cool.
So I never had the opportunity to revise and re-enter one.
Okay, my second question then is, do you get any kind of guidance from judges as to how you might improve it? How do you receive word that
It's
you did?
so my first time when I was a Silver Honorable Mention, I got an email that told me I was a Silver Honorable Mention, and I could contact them to get a nice poster that it would say that I was. Then my one story, Master Browns, was rejected, so I just got the rejection email. And then when I was a finalist, that's when Joni called me. And so if you're a finalist, you get a call from Joni. So that's how you find out.
And they just say you're a finalist?
Yeah, I mean, I knew the first time I didn't know because it didn't come up with my caller ID, obviously, so I didn't know who it was. And she said, "This is Joni, and you're a finalist." And so I was very excited and surprised and all that good stuff. The second time, I recognized the number, so I knew that it was Joni calling and that she had some good news for me.
I guess, how many entries do you get, David?
We're actually, each quarter, it's been growing this year. And in fact, for the last 3 years, I think every quarter has been larger than the last. And I'm not supposed to tell how many we get because we're afraid that some people might get disheartened.
Okay.
It is a large contest. I guess we'll put it, I don't know of a bigger one in the world. I'll put it that way. So I typically don't talk about exactly how many we get, but I can say that it's in the thousands.
Wow. Okay. Well, you too. Yeah. And Daniel, do you get that many illustration entries too?
You know, I'm not in charge of the illustrations, but yes, I believe they get at least as many illustrations as we do.
Okay.
They just don't have to read the whole big story. They can kind of do the judging at a glance, I guess is about the easy way to put it.
Okay. As I read your story, Storm, I got the definite feeling that the world you had created had its own kind of a class system or a caste system, one in which the humans are on top. But are they really on top? There were some scenes in there that seemed to indicate dissatisfaction on the part of other species.
Yeah, so I'd say humans are certainly on top in this, in my world that the story takes place in. They are kind of the colonizers of the galaxy. They're going out and they're kind of, imposing civilization on these other alien species that already have civilization of one kind or another usually, and humans are just more technologically advanced. That's the only difference.
That's interesting. So in yours, the humans are the most technologically advanced.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, in most ways, they're certainly they're the only ones kind of jumping around the stars. So they're kind of the they're first. If you like read about theories about why we haven't found alien civilizations yet, or why they haven't found us, it's because there are a bunch of them around, and they're waiting for one of them to figure out star travel and then get there first and beat the other ones to it, pretty much. So in this world, humans were there first, and obviously because they have this advantage, you kind of get it in Sadiq's poem a little bit that there's this kind of roiling dislike for some of the ways that humanity kind of wields its advantage.
Yeah. Okay. Is that the point you were trying to? What was the point that you were trying to make with your story?
So the point, I think, because the original germ for the story, it was a flash, and so it's been expanded by about 3 times its original length. So the germ is just kind of this meditation on how difficult it is to fathom, if you're a certain person in a certain group, what it is to have elements of your culture or where you're from kind of stolen or appropriated.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's just kind of meditating on that because I'm a person that's in that group. I can't really fathom what it feels like to have an element of my culture stolen or co-opted or appropriated. And so, in that respect, I'm kind of Ruya writing the story. Like, I can't really understand it, but I think the point of the story is to incite empathy with that position.
Mhm. Well, that's cool. That's cool. I love the imagination you showed in coming up with the different ways other creatures could entertain humans in this story.
Okay.
What gave you those ideas? Why don't you
So I
talk
think-
about the couple of the characters?
Yeah, so I think, so with the two veteran performers, we have a singer and we have a poet. And I think I went with those because they seem like the most innately human kind of forms of performance that almost seem like they're something specific to kind of consciousness. Like they seem so fundamental. It's just using the body and the mind to entertain. So that seemed like something that all cultures would have some form of, some kind of music, some kind of linguistic performance, poetry. And then I purposely didn't describe what wind writing is, because that was something that was inherently native and original and not something that humans can do. So I also, for word count, because it was originally a flash, I didn't have time to describe what it was.
Okay. The fact that the humans in your story spend so much time and effort arranging these entertainments by visitors from other planets, is that, I wondered if that was in any way a comment on where you see our society going.
I think it was more a function of the situation as, kind of, capitalism or colonization or whatever, like writ large, across the galaxy, that you would have that there would be this kind of tiered element, and that these would be I'm trying to think.
Representatives of their cultures?
I think it's just a function of being accurate with how these performers would be kind of shopped around like cattle in this kind of environment. I think it was more just a function of being honest with the world as I created it, more so than trying to say anything with that. I think it's just a function of the world as it was made that this would happen.
Okay. David, what did you like best about Storm's story?
I get a lot of stories, and first of all, it was beautifully written. Caught me right from the opening, and I felt like I was in the hands of a real professional all the way. A lot of times when you get new stories or authors from new authors, you can feel a little bit of hesitation or something, but it was beautifully written. But also I loved the depth to it. There were a lot of layers there. If you've traveled to, for example, the Polynesian Islands or something like that, you'll see performances by natives where they, come and, put on their ceremonial clothes and do some ancient dances and things like that. And it had that flavor to it. And yet at the same time, you got a sense that the humans didn't really appreciate these other art forms, these other cultures, and that there was a greater depth and beauty that was still there to be expressed. And so as I was reading it, I just kind of fell in love with the piece. That tends to happen with each piece. One of the great things about being the anthology editor is that I love all the stories that go into the anthology, but I never know which one's going to be the first place winner exactly, so I was surprised that that story came in third. It could have been a first place story, because a lot of times I'll get three stories where, it's just a hair's breadth between first, second, and third. And so we sometimes get ties, and I'm called upon to break the tie or something. But in this particular case, I just love the story, and I loved it the first time I read it, and I loved it after editing it, 3 or 4 times too. So it's just a great story.
Great. Storm, would you mind reading a couple paragraphs from your story?
Sure.
Give us an idea.
Sure, I'll read, we'll do the first sunset show. Okay. So this is just a couple paragraphs into the start of the story. For the first night, they chose the sunset of a world called RNA in the Alpha Carinae system. I knew nothing about this world, but I watched in amazement as the sun of Earth Vega became the sun of RNA. When the sun touched the distant peaks, it changed from white to a smoldering orange and shrunk by at least a third. It painted the sky vivid greens and purples. There was no gradient to the shades, no violets, light greens, or near blues. The sky was either emerald or amethyst. The clouds swirled into the shifting colors as the shades swam but never mixed. It was so beautiful that it startled me. I still had so much left to see, not only on Earth Vega, but throughout the galaxy, and I feared nothing would ever measure up to the sunset show, to the first time I saw the humans change the stars.
Thank you. Okay, Daniel, your illustration, of course, has nothing to do with either Storm's or Leah's stories. But please, if you could describe for us briefly the plot of Molting Season and what it had to do with the illustration you came up with.
Sure. Well, multi-season was a real interesting story to illustrate and to kind of tackle. It takes place in Detroit, set in a sort of post-apocalyptic dystopian world in where these species of aliens called skulls is what they're nicknamed, kind of coexist and assimilate with the human population. However, they bring with them this sort of deadly mating ritual or mating ceremony, which is it plagues both. It kills off both the male humans and the aliens, and that's kind of a reoccurring theme in the story, and where the protagonist kind of lives amongst these aliens. They're kind of separated from them. However, the protagonist enters this sort of dream state where he dreams of this kind of mating ceremony, which is where things kind of get pretty interesting. So in this dream, he envisions this like massive female alien on this moonscape environment where around him are like swarms of other males, and they go mate with the female and then eventually sacrifice themselves. And then he wakes up from the dream, and that was a kind of a common theme when reading the story. It was almost like I was going as a reader in and out of this dream state. It was overall very, very surreal, but I enjoyed it.
So tell us how your illustration related to the story. And if you have a better picture, I mean, if you want me to show it again.
I can, so I actually have a step-by-step kind of process. If I could share my screen.
Yeah.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Let me go ahead and, one moment. It says
I'm not letting you.
Yeah, disabled screen sharing.
Okay. No. No. What did I just do?
Oh, now you started screen sharing.
I don't want to do screen.
You're sharing your screen instead of his.
Stop share. Okay. How can I enable it?
I think if you make him
multiple participants. There we go. Okay, try now.
Okay. All right. Okay, here we go. Okay, so this looks like a bunch of scribbles. That's kind of how I start out. In the last live event, I also went through this. So I'll read the story several times just to get a feel for what it's about, and I'll write down keywords that pop into mind, any interesting scenes. Now I had, all these are just different thumbnails. I came up with these sketches, and as you can see, the short description on the left, I was, I could have gone in a couple different directions, either like a narrative, pretty straightforward illustration of a scene in the story versus a more conceptual illustration about, the idea of what it means to me, like how I was interpreted the story. So we ended up going along with a more narrative scene of what I envisioned the dream mating alien ritual to be, and it was the language in which Tim wrote this story was very surreal and had a lot for me to work with. So yeah, again on the left, I just the ink drawing, ink painting, then we obviously working with excellent art directors, with Riders of the Future. We helped me make it more creepy by adding the skull on there, and truly terrifying. So
that's cool. It's a very cool illustration.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I can stop sharing if you'd like. I can, or if you want me to leave it up for everyone to look for the meantime, I don't mind.
I can't access the chat. Let's see. I'm wondering if anyone in the audience has questions about this, but I don't know. We'll come back to that if they
Sure.
do. What did you think of his illustration, David?
This is probably the first time I've actually gotten a good look at it. So I think it's a fantastic illustration. We really do get a lot of the best new illustrators in the world for this contest. And as someone who's published a lot of short stories in magazines, I look at them and I kind of go, oh, that's cool. I wish I had that great illustration for my next short story. So this one's really nice. I haven't had a chance to get a good look at all of the other ones in comparison, but I suspect he's a really strong contender for the grand prize here, with an illustration like that.
Mm-hmm. The stories that you're working on illustrating right now, how'd you come across them? Are they for a particular anthology, Daniel?
So that kind of part of the biography was, I guess, had to be while I was in school. So during my thesis, I illustrated a series of it was a Russian satire called Master and Margarita. It was very popular in Russia at the time. My professor recommended it to me. I read it. It was a great book. However, there weren't really many illustrated versions in the West. So I took it, I created almost like a chapter book kind of illustration project for a series of illustrations during my thesis, and also found some other anthology of short stories from the that my professor, we kind of worked together to kind of help. He has a really rich understanding of kind of 19th century literature and stuff like that. So he helped me discover this one anthology of short stories called King and the Golden Mask. It's pretty obscure, but I enjoyed working in that format, having kind of shorter stories where you're able to get more kind of a more immediate feel of what the story's about. And
Uh-huh.
yeah.
What pulls you to dark fantasy?
It's a good question. It's a genre that's I've kind of always been I've always enjoyed. I have older brothers, so as a kid growing up, I was always around the video games and the movies that they were into, which were very mature. So you have like the Diablo games, and I was very young, so very it created an impression on me.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Thank you. Leah, I couldn't help but wonder as I read Yellow and Pink. It was such an intimate story. If the fear of losing a loved one forever, if you were, as you were writing this, were you thinking of your own relationship with your husband?
I mean, he was certainly one of the forefront people that I was thinking about when I was writing the story, because you kind of have to draw on that to understand what is making that character do what he's doing, which is pretty reprehensible, honestly. But I think also that I tried to make sure that this was something that was relatable to people who were not married. I think that this is something that people can relate to for any of their loved ones, for their parents, for their kids, for their spouse, for their friends, even for some people. So yes, that was part of what I used as inspiration for how I wanted to write those particular emotions. But I think it was just one of those things.
Where did you get the idea from?
I got the idea from the first line, actually. It just kind of popped into my head in the shower one day, and I was like, oh, well, that's cool, but like, why would you say that? And then I just kind of played the what if game, and then I wrote an intro, and I was like, all right, I think I could make a story out of this probably.
Okay, you're gonna have to read that first paragraph.
Oh, sure.
People will.
How many times, the dying man whispered. Nathan Reed's attention did not waver from the arm that he was working on. Decades ago, Edward Weaver's dying words had bothered him. Today, they were like a fly lighting briefly on his neck, and he had to ask, pardon? How many times have you killed me? 8, counting this one, Nathan said. Nothing personal, it's just that this way you can't tell anybody.
Now you've written other stories. Is there a common thread to the kinds of stories you write, or you just go all over the place?
Well, my critique group tells me that there is a common thread, which is that I like to rip people's souls out. Yeah, I tend to write the more bittersweet type of ending, as Dave puts it, which is, it's not really a happy ending, but it's not really a sad ending either, in the sense that maybe the character's done the right thing, but it hasn't turned out to be the thing that the character really wanted in the beginning, because maybe they were wanting the wrong thing.
Yeah. Okay. What do you think of Leah's story, David?
Well, once again, I think one of the weaknesses that I see in a lot of stories that come through with Writers of the Future with new writers, and I mean, you've got to remember that a lot of people who enter the contest may be quite young. You know, we are talking about teenagers, and so a lot of stories that I get are pretty simple, and yet this one, once again, had some moral depth to it. You know, we have a character who is killing someone, but it's a love story, I guess, ultimately, when you start looking at it. And there's a certain, how should I say it, that it seemed to me like there was a certain underlying brightness and hope to the piece that that basically made me attracted to it and say, yeah, I want to have this as a representative of the quarter. I think in particular in that quarter, I was looking at the stories, and I remember thinking that I had I get 8 finalists that I get to choose. And I remember thinking that I had a very diverse group, but that the tone was a little bit dark for some of the stories. And so I was looking for something that had bite to it, but that also did have kind of a uplifting tone underneath it. And so, and then of course I wanted something that was going to have an emotionally powerful ending. And I think that that worked well with this particular story. I've noticed from the reviews that have come in that just about all of the reviewers have singled out this story as one of their favorites, you know, and so that's always a great sign.
Well, that's great.
Thanks.
Could you describe your writing process, Leah? Do you try to keep a regular schedule? Do you write daily? What time of day? Where?
I do write daily, but Dave's going to be mad at me because I don't have a schedule. I do generally write in the same place, though. I'll just kind of sit down in my nice comfy recliner that I'm totally not in right now and try to get some writing done. But mostly I kind of do the same thing that I did for this story. I sort of just come up with an opening and eventually a story comes out. I am, I believe, what we call a pantser.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. Do you write? I know Storm is working on a novel right now. Have you always done short stories? Are you continuing in that vein, or are you looking to do different things?
Currently continuing on short stories because I think it's a really good way of tracking my progress in terms of getting to be more consistently at professional level in terms of writing. I can certainly get a short story done faster than I can get a novel done, but I am also working on novel writing because, you know, eventually if you want to really step up your career, you got to eventually get into novels if that's what you want to do. And novels are a whole different beast than short stories. So it's time to get practicing on that real quick.
Yeah, that's true. And how were you first introduced to sugar gliders as pets?
Hilariously enough, it was at a mall in New Hampshire. They were kind of just one of those pocket pets displays in the middle of the hallway. I've since learned that unfortunately Pocket Pets is not the greatest place to get sugar gliders from or information about sugar gliders from. So like, please don't, if you're gonna take anything away from the sugar glider discussion, please don't buy from Pocket Pets. But the guy was there, he was super nice. He had this cute little flying squirrel looking thing in his pocket and he was like, you wanna hold it? And I was like, do I wanna hold it? So.
Does it hurt to hold? It looked like they had some pretty good nails on their.
Yeah, they do, but it's worth it because they're really cute. And when you pet them, they just don't even feel like real life creatures. They feel like their fur is velvet almost. They're really, really soft. They're super cute. And if you can spend the time with them, they bond with you really closely. They're pretty cute little creatures.
Are they inspiring any of your characters in future stories or past?
It's a good question. Well, I would say if they were going to inspire any character, it would be one of those ones that's a little too smart for its own good.
Okay. Okay, now finally, I've got some questions from our audience that were given to me in advance for David that turn us really to writing. And then I'm going to turn the time over to David while I put some links in the chat room. These first questions are from Melva Gifford. 1, I write multiple genres, but this is for middle grade and teen fiction. What are your suggestions in regards to a variety of locations in a book or short story? For middle grade and teen fiction, a lot of stuff happens at school. I assume it would be advisable to have scenes away from the school?
Absolutely. I hear a lot of middle grade editors saying that they get really tired of seeing parts of your story set in a school. So if you can bring another setting to life, I don't know that it matters a whole lot, but if you look at the best-selling books and movies of all time, they all have one thing in common, and that is that they transport you to another time and another place. And so, you know, when I chose to push Harry Potter big with Scholastic, or for Scholastic, you know, part of that was, you know, how well did this book transport me? And I needed to make sure right from the start that it took you to Hogwarts and really brought another world to life. And so I would take a look at something like Harry Potter and say, does this really transport the reader into another time and another place and away from school in particular? Because kids who are reading your books are going to be wanting to escape school too. They've spent enough time there for the day.
Well, except for right now, but
Yeah. Maybe
okay.
maybe now's a good time to write a book where they're all stuck in school all day long.
Okay, her second question. In my effort to avoid run-on sentences, I'm now having an issue with the opposite problem. I have an issue with short, choppy sentences that can influence pacing. What do you suggest on how to address choppy fiction?
Well, there's a couple of things that you can do. You know, Hemingway uh, was known as the master of the short sentence, and he did write a lot of short sentences. But there are places in each of his books and each of his novellas where he has very long sentences, where he will write a 400 uh, to 450 word sentence. Okay. Um, Part of the reason that people don't notice that he was a master of long sentences was because he did them so well. He would write in single syllables in most cases. Most of his words were single syllable. If he had two syllables, that was fairly unusual, and he hardly ever used a three or a four syllable word. And so his sentences read effortlessly because they had short syllables, but and they were also combined. He used a lot of sentences that had an and in it, or just had commas with clauses in between. And so he was able to do that rather elegantly. But what I'd suggest is that I very often will take a particular character and I'll say, this is the way that this character talks. This character talks in long sentences. And I'll make sure that they have maybe 20 words to a sentence. I think that for a middle grade audience, you don't want to go too long. When I was looking at Harry Potter, for example, I I looked at the length of the sentences, and that raises the reading level for the readers. If you've got 25 word sentences, you're probably up at about a sixth grade reading level. And so for a middle grade book where you might be wanting a third grade reading level, that's a little bit long. So what I do is I just try to make sure that I've got a few characters that have long sentences. And particularly if I'm trying to describe maybe a visual like a sunset, I might want to say in my descriptions, let's go ahead and have some longer descriptions where I kind of pack in the visual elements one after another so that I can have little short bursts of images and have a nice, long, elegant sentence. And just make sure that the words sound good together. I mean, remember that anytime that you write a story, it's poetry. So I'm looking for beautiful writing as well as images that click, I guess is the way to put it.
Okay. And she wants to know what your advice is on creating memorable endings.
You know, there was a writer years ago who won the Writer's Digest Award for Best Short Story. This was back in about 1990. And then he won it again the following year. And that's a huge contest that was getting, you know, at the time, somewhere close to 8,000 or 9,000 entries per year. And so a reporter looked at it and said, okay, how could you possibly win 2 years in a row? If you look at it mathematically, that's just highly improbable. You know, there's 10,000 times 10,000 minus one. That's your odds against winning it 2 years in a row. And the author said, he who makes the reader cry the most wins. Okay. And so you're looking for an ending that's going to be emotionally powerful. If I have 8 stories in Writers of the Future and I turn them into the judges for them to choose a first place winner, I can choose, I always know who's going to win because I can look at them and say, this was the one that was most emotionally powerful for me. And so the one that really does make you cry in an honest way, I think very often does it. And I've had a couple of friends who've said, you know, I set a goal in writing this story, not to make the judge cry, but to make them cry 3 times before the end. When that particular author did it, she was a Nebula finalist, you know, one of the better stories of the year. So look for that emotionally powerful ending, I think is what you want to do.
Okay. So excuse my phone there. Finally, she asks, some authors are very good at creating cliffhangers at the end of chapters. What suggestions do you have on how to do better on that?
Well, one thing that I always do is when I'm writing a story, I write it out, and as I'm going through my edit, I look at where the story breaks, and very often I'll be going through and I'll go, God, the nice high point right here, you know, 12 pages into this chapter. Maybe that's a better point to break the chapter. And so I look for a way to put a hook there. And a hook is just any little bit of information where your reader discovers that there's some sort of mystery going on. Okay. You know, there might be a knock at the door, or your character steps outside of a doorway and screams, or, you know, something like that, where the reader has to wonder what's going on. And particularly since I like to alternate viewpoints between chapters, that's a great place to put in a cliffhanger. But I always look at the scene and ask, how can I create a good hook for the end of this? And a lot of times it's simply a matter of going into the mind of the character, into their thoughts, and telling us what that character is worried about, or what they're planning to do. And those 2 things right there can create a nice emotional hook so that the reader feels like they're drawn back to what's going to see what happens next.
Okay, I've got 2 questions from Wolf Moon.
Okay.
Number 1, when will 3rd quarter results come out for volume 37?
Okay. 3rd quarter results, I'm in the process of judging. I just got passed off. The story got passed off to me this week. And so I have to go through and make my pass. And if I work for a good 12 hours a day, I can probably get it done in 10 days, something like that. And then it has to go to the other judges. So I'm thinking 3 to 4 weeks from now. Probably won't get the announcement before the end of September, but we'll be pretty close.
Okay. And his second question, now that you've seen how your anthology is shaping up for the year, what type of story are you missing or would still like to see submitted before the contest year closes out?
Well, I really love all kinds of stories. I'm one of those people who likes to be surprised. So in this particular anthology, though, I do have, I think, one nice short fantasy, epic fantasy kind of a story. And I would love, another good sword and sorcery piece that that shows some good world building. And I'd also like to see I'd like to see some nice science fiction with some world building. I'm always looking for that. Off-world science fiction is always fun. But those are the 2. I'm usually begging for comedy at this time of the year. But I've actually got a couple of good comic stories already, so doesn't mean that I won't take them, because I'll take any good comedy that I can get. Yeah, I think that does it.
Okay. All right. At this point, I'm going to step away and type in some links while I let David continue either asking questions of Storm, Leah, or Daniel, or you who are watching and listening, you can put in questions. And David, if you'll kind of track those.
Yeah.
Do you know?
I actually do have one question that I'll answer, that so I don't forget, because it came up right at the beginning. It says, do your eyes roll up in your head slightly for slightly polished repeat entries that come quarter after quarter? Do you prefer fresh stories? Sorry for the early question. Okay. Yeah. If a writer writes a good story and really feels like they deserved to win with that story, I'm all open to reading it. Now, if I passed on it, say 3 times already, then there's probably a reason I'm passing on it. Sometimes I'll get perfectly good stories, and I'll look at them and I'll say, this story is perfectly publishable, but I don't think it's quite right for us. And I'll give you an example. I will sometimes get stories that I think are too graphically violent, for example, and I'll say, this is a perfectly good story. It would go into a magazine or an anthology just fine. But since our anthologies are going to schools and stuff, I might feel a little bit uncomfortable putting that one in. So I look at a story and I say, is it good? If it does come through 2 or 3 times, I will look at it. I remember one story that came through 3 times, and I finally ran it past the judges, and the judges didn't take it. And on the other hand, I have had a couple of stories where I've seen the entry once or twice before, and the author went and improved it. And sometimes all it takes is a little bit. I've sometimes had one where I thought, man, that ending is a little bit weak, but the rest of the story was great. And so it was a matter of polishing one scene. Unfortunately, I can't give you any advice on that. If I give you a silver honorable mention, or even if you're a finalist, then I don't get to give you any information. It's only if you're a semifinalist, and once you're a semifinalist, the story is disqualified from further entry. So I've had a lot of semifinalists where I've given advice, and the authors have gone on to publish it in other places, and that's great. But I'm hesitant to give out semifinalist spots simply because I don't want to disqualify you from entering. So sometimes I'll really love a story and I'll say, okay, we're going to call this one an honorable mention, and that'll get them thinking about what they need to do to fix it, and maybe they'll get some good advice from their writing group, and hopefully I'll see it again. So sometimes I'm really hoping to see the story again. Okay, so my questions for our authors and our artist here. Each of you, I think, at least among our writers, had entered the contest before, and I just wondered, when you turned in your submission, in your heart, did you feel like you had won, or that you were going to win, or were you completely taken by surprise that that story won, or that this submission won? How did you see it? Let's start off with Leah.
Sure. So yeah, I had entered one time before I won, and I don't think you probably ever saw that story because I was such a noob that I didn't even put the title on the top, and I've personally apologized to Carrie English for that. But when I entered this story, I wasn't like positive that I won or anything, but I remember saying to my husband a couple times, like, man, if I'm gonna win, I really hope it's this story. I really love this story. Like, I put my heart into this story, really. And then Funnily enough, I actually went and took a couple of your classes, like maybe a month after I'd submitted it, and I was kicking myself because I could see the stuff that I'd messed up in the story, and I totally thought it was going to get rejected, and I was like thinking about how I was going to rewrite it, and it was going to be so much better, and then Joni called me, and I was like, never mind. And then when you edited it, you edited some of the same things I was kicking myself for. So I guess it worked out.
Yeah. Okay, Storm?
So for me, my first submission was longer. It was towards the upper end of the. It's the longest story I've published. It's over 8,700 words, and it was my first submission to the contest. So I didn't really have any illusions that I was going to win. I was at my MFA program in my first semester, and Chip had just told me, start submitting stuff. So Chip is Samuel Delaney, and so I did. And so I was pretty pumped to get a silver honorable mention, honestly, and then to go on and sell it. But the biggest surprise for me was my story, Master Brahms. I was really high on that when I submitted it, and that was my low. I just got a rejection. There was no placing whatsoever. So that one kind of, I guess, knocked me down a little bit. So, and then it sold to Apex. So maybe it was one of those examples of something that just wasn't right for the anthologies. I didn't change it much. But Stolen Sky has always been one of my stories that I wrote and I just loved. So I was really happy when Joni called me with this story that this one was a finalist and would have a chance to be a winner. I was really happy when I submitted it. I was confident that I would do well. I was still surprised when I got the finalist call again. Yeah, so I was confident in this submission, I think. As confident as I had been in the other ones, even after being surprised with a previous entry.
Yeah, Wolf is here too. What and I haven't asked him any questions, and I feel like maybe we should. What about you, Wolf? How did you feel when you entered the contest?
Well, I was entering for 25 years, and my problem was I was writing 17,000 word stories, and those are really hard to sell. So I finally got one of those semifinalists from you, and you said what my problem was, and it was, hey, it's too long. You've got to kill your darlings. And so I went through and did that with that story. I sold that to Deep Magic, by the way. So thank you for that wonderful advice. And then I started writing tighter, shorter stories because I knew how to do it. I just liked my big stories, but I had to get that out of my head and say, well, what does Dave want? And what does the contest want? What does the anthology want? So when I wrote Super Duper Moon Girl, I wrote that in a day and a half at the very end of the contest year. And when I finished, it was 11:56 when I pushed submit. And as soon as I pushed submit, I started writing my acceptance speech. I knew that was my winner. I had no question of it. I've never had a story fly out of me so fast. I've never had so much power go into it. And when I wrote that at the end and sent it off, I immediately started writing my acceptance speech because I knew I knew that was my winner, and it was.
Yeah.
David Elsonson's on too.
Oh, okay.
Do you want to ask him?
Sure. Yeah. Please, David. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, great.
This is regarding whether I knew it was a story that might be worthy of the contest.
Yeah.
I was hoping to get at least an honorable mention. I've gotten honorable mentions before, and I was happy with those. And then when Joni called me and said that you're a finalist, I'm like, wow, that's wonderful. That's a really nice thing to put, on the author's website, and I was happy with that. And then she called back about a week later and said, you got second place. So that it did throw me for a bit of a loop, but I felt like Trading Ghosts was as good as I could make it, and I hoped it would resonate with the judges, but I didn't know it would get as far as it did.
Yeah. Great story, by the way. And let's see, we also had Daniel as an artist. When you turn in those art pieces, do you feel like, gosh, this is a worthy attempt, or how do you feel?
It's an interesting question. So it was my first time submitting to writers, illustrators of the future. And I kind of got into the mindset of, not planning on hearing back from any scholarships or grants. So I was just sending out a bunch of work everywhere and kind of forgetting it, just so I won't get too devastated if I don't hear back. So that's precisely what happened. So I submitted to Writers of the Future with my work from the previous semester. This is already my senior year in undergrad, and Joni gave me a call after one of my final exams, and I was surprised. I obviously didn't recognize the number at first, and then I remembered, oh, this is for the competition I applied for. So yeah, definitely surprising. It was very it was good to hear that that my work was at a level where it would be accepted into this big of a competition. So I was very proud of that.
I'm going to have to start wrapping up, but I wanted, I think Zach said, Conan O'Brien once said he doesn't actually laugh anymore at great jokes that come through the writer's room. He and the writers just nod and say, yes, this goes on the show. Clearly this is hyperbolic, but after judging and editing, etc. for so many years, David, do you still actually get tears, or do you just know that it's tear-worthy?
I still actually get tears. Not all the time. I do have to admit I'm a little bit old and jaded at this point, but I think that the way that you know that a story is great is when it transports you in spite of yourself. As a judge who's seen it all pretty much, I look at the stories, and if you can still bring the magic to a story and get me emotionally and intellectually involved in the story and draw some real tears, I respect that. I look at that and I go, yeah, that's a really worthy attempt there, and I'll definitely be putting that in my finalist pile. Now you have to understand that sometimes I get 40 stories in my finalist pile, and I have to whittle them down to 8. And there are times when where it's almost heartbreaking to say, okay, I've got to get rid of this one because I think this one is stronger. But and there are some stories that I look back on them and I think I really made a mistake back there in Q3 of 2016, or something like that, because I think back on some of the stories that have gotten rejected and thought that story, I really wanted it in my anthology.
Well, I want to thank all of our panelists for this interesting and enlightening discussion today, and for all of you out there who watched and listened, and some of you posed some questions as well. Remember, everyone, you can order this book and some of David's through our website using the links I provided in the chat room. You'll receive a follow-up email with all these links, as well as links to the recording and the link to the survey. I hope you'll take a few minutes to do the survey. While I have your attention, I would note that this year, the World Fantasy Convention, which was to have been held in Salt Lake City, is going to be held virtually from Thursday, October 29th to Sunday, November 1st. And I put a link in for that. Our thanks to the book festival's major sponsors, George S. and Dolores Dory Eccles Foundation, Salt Lake City Arts Council, Salt Lake County Zoo Arts and Parks Fund, Summit County RAP, whatever that means, Weber County RAMP, the Charles Redd Center for Western Studies, the King's English Bookshop, Weller Bookworks, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Endowment for the Arts, and Catalyst. Again, thank you to David, Storm, Leah. I think Leah had to leave. And Daniel.
I'm here.
Oh, you're there. Okay. For some reason, Wolf Moon kind of shoved you out of the way. All right.
How dare you?
Can
And
you show us your sugar gliders while you're there?
I can bring them into the Apex meeting. I'm sure Orson Scott Card will love them.
oh,
There
yeah.
you go.
Anyway, thanks to all of you who joined us today. Stay safe and stay well.
Okay, thank you. Have a
Thank you.
great day.
Thank you.
You too.